Alright guys, how's it going? Welcome back. And I'm welcoming back today my E46 M3 to the channel. It's been a while since I've filmed something with this car. Long-term viewers of this channel will know that I spent £8,000 buying this car, and then roughly the same again making it run and look and drive like new. It's been a bit of a passion project for me. I got a little bit stressed out and a little bit deflated when I went through all the bills and realised how much I'd spent on this car. But then I cleverly came up with a solution. I decided that rather than worry about all the money I'd spent on this car, and I can't believe I didn't do this sooner, what I've done is just torn up those receipts. I've just completely forgotten about it, and now I feel much better. How's that for consumer advice? You just don't get that sort of advice from other channels, do you? So if the bills don't exist, then did it really happen? Although I documented that mini restoration project on this channel over 3 or 4 episodes, it occurred to me the other day that I hadn't actually filmed a proper review with it. So here we go. Should you buy an E46 BMW M3? Well, as I've said in countless other BMW videos, the E46 is my favourite 3 Series of all time. It was the last analogue 3 Series before they went digital. The E46 is a handwritten letter in the post rather than an email. It's a few pints and a laugh with your mates in the local pub rather than a Zoom chat. I love them, I think they're fantastic cars. I've had lots of E46s over the years, mainly 330s, and I would always kid myself that because I could never afford an M3, that the 330 was almost as good as the M3. But now, having owned one and driven one, they're like chalk and cheese, they really are. As good as the M54 engine is in those 330s, it just doesn't compare to the S54 you get in the M3. So for all those years, I was just fooling myself, really. Comparing an M3 to a 330 is a bit like, well, it's a bit like comparing Mo Farah to Eddie the Eagle. Yes, they're both sportsmen, but that's where the similarities end. The E46 M3 ran from 2001 until 2006. This model's the late 2005, so it's one of the last iterations of it before it was replaced with the E92 M3. Under the bonnet is the 3.2 litre S54 engine. Now it's a 340 horsepower straight 6 naturally aspirated petrol engine, and it is a gem. It does this sort of thing whenever you want it to. What's good about this generation M3 is that you can use almost all of the power it produces. It's not too much of a handful. Most modern cars now have that much power that you can only really use 3/4 of it, whereas with this M3 you can really squeeze every last drop out of it. It sounds great. I think it's a really snarling, fire-breathing engine. It's a totally different tone that you got from the M54 engine. It's got this illuminated rev counter too, so when you first start it up when the engine's cold, so you don't do it any damage, those lights come on at around 4,500 RPM. As the engine heats up, those lights slowly fade away. So you can push it and push it and push it. I know by today's standards 340 horsepower isn't an awful lot, but back then it was. And to be fair, it still does a really good job of putting a smile on your face, as you'll probably see throughout the rest of this video. When you put it in sport mode, it gets even better. So let's talk figures then. So it produces just over 340 horsepower. It's capable of hitting 0 to 60 in around 5.5 seconds. And it's limited to 155 miles an hour. And importantly, I think they're the perfect sort of figures for a road car. Any less than that, it'd just be too slow and boring. And any more than that, you'd amass points quicker than Katrina in the waves. Let me just demonstrate, and I hope you can pick up some of this noise from my mic. So yeah, still a quick car this. I should point out the latest addition to this car. After all the thousands of pounds I've spent on it, one of the best purchases I've ever made was this £30 cup holder from eBay. The E46 M3 was offered with 2 gearboxes, a 6-speed manual, which enthusiasts prefer, or this semi-automatic SMG. It's not a modern twin clutch setup, it's just a single clutch, and by modern standards, it is a little bit on the slow side. Lots of people love to tear it apart, but I'm not one of those people. Yes, it's not brilliant, but it's not bad. Watch this, for example. Change down into 4th gear. One little gripe about it though is the paddles are mounted to the steering wheel. I'd much prefer them to be mounted to the column. Watch this. So about to change gear. Not difficult, is it? It's also fairly quick to respond. Not by modern standards, but just in general. So it's not the best thing the Germans have ever come up with, but I just don't think it's as bad as people suggest. Mine has the slightly later SMG 2 gearbox. Many of you have told me that it's terrible and I should convert it to a manual, which I may do at some point, I don't know, haven't quite decided yet. I think it's probably best to wait for it to break and then convert it to a manual. So which one should you buy? Well, here's what I think, and I'm going to be brutally honest now. And this car's not for sale, by the way, so I'm not going to start singing the praise of the SMG because I'm hoping to sell it to one of you. I'm keeping this car. But the truth is, the SMG just isn't that bad. Round town, if you're not used to it, it can be a little bit jerky, yes. And if you've never driven one before and you're a little bit heavy with your right foot, you find yourself kangarooing all over the place and it's a little bit embarrassing. You just look foolish. But once you get to know it and know how to operate it and get the best from it, it's quite rewarding. And yeah, the gear changes are pretty weird. Watch this. Third to fourth. How much quicker do you need it to be than that? So the SMG in that respect isn't a whole lot worse. So if you're in the market for a used M3, I certainly wouldn't be frightened off by the SMG. Yes, the pumps can sometimes fail, but then so can a clutch on a manual car. So, you know, if you think like that, you'd never do anything, would you? I actually quite like the SMG because I feel as though it needs my input. This isn't just a point and shoot car that any idiot can operate. It takes time to build up your knowledge and experience of how to use it and how to get the best out of it. But once you've mastered that, then yeah, it's pretty rewarding. It handles really well too, I mean, as you might expect. There is quite a lot of scuttle shake, which is typical of a convertible from the early 2000s. It's not as bad as like a 90s Saab convertible, but it's just not as good or as taut as modern convertibles. These are things that you forget from driving, you know, more modern, youthful cars. And the ride is on the firm side. You've probably seen the camera shaking all over the place today. That doesn't help with the big 19-inch wheels that I've got, which I think look great, but do affect the ride. I think the steering's perfect. It just feels really well balanced and poised. When I bought this, a lot of people told me that I should have bought the coupe version because it's stiffer, lighter, and better around a track. But that doesn't really interest me because I'm never going to take this around a track. Plus, I wanted a convertible so that when the weather's nice, which it isn't very nice today, but when the weather is nice, for those 2 or 3 days a year, I can drive around with the roof down. Plus, I think the convertible is just a prettier, better looking car. Running costs aren't too bad actually, they're not as scary as you might think. To fill the tank with V-Power fuel, it costs around £70, and you'll get around 18.5 miles per gallon around town, and close to 30 miles per gallon on a motorway run. Which, yeah, isn't brilliant, but it's not as bad as you might think for a sports car like this. The build quality is also very good. Everything feels sturdy and solid. Because this is a pre-2006 model, the road tax is only £330 a year, not £550 like it might be for a late one. So, common issues. I know I've spent thousands on this car, and it wasn't really a bad one to begin with. It's just been a little bit neglected, and I did get a little bit carried away with it, I must admit. I could have saved a few grand here or there, but it just didn't seem right to do that to the car because the car deserved some TLC. Plus, the majority of the money that I spent was things like a full engine service, a service on the gearbox, new tyres, brake discs and pads, brake pipes because they'd corroded. They're all fairly standard things, and they weren't that much more expensive than a standard 3 Series. You do need to service the SMG gearbox though, so that's worth bearing in mind. But if you find yourself a good BMW specialist, they'll just take care of everything. Because of what it is, you might want to check for panel gaps to make sure it's not been wrapped around a tree. Also, the front wings can rust. The inner liner, the inner wheel arch liner, rubs away at the inside of the wing, and then salt and water and all sorts of grime and muck and stuff collects there, and then it rots from the inside out. Engine-wise, the S54 is a terrific engine, but they can suffer with head gasket issues, rod bearing issues, Vanos system issues. But because they've been around for so long, there are lots of companies, or specialist companies, that will refurbish the Vanos system and sort out any other issues that you've got. So again, I know it might cost you a few £100 or £1,000 to sort out, but it is all fixable stuff. And if you get one that's been maintained, you might not have those issues. In terms of what it costs to service, I think Darren Wood, the local BMW specialist, did a full service on this. I can't remember off the top of my head what it cost me because, well, I've thrown away all the receipts now, haven't I? But no, I think it cost me about 600 quid off memory. So it's not too bad, is it really? Another common issue, I've just had the amp refurbished in this. That lives in a little cubby hole in the boot. And for the last few months, every time I use this, there was this weird hissing and popping and crackling coming out of the speakers occasionally. It didn't happen regularly enough for me to record it, but it was a bit of a weird fault. I thought it was a problem with the speakers or the tweeters. Anyway, it wasn't, it was the amp. Yeah, I found a company online who refurbished the amp for about £80. So 4 screws and a jiffy envelope later, it's all working perfectly. So yes, I admit, you do need slightly deeper pockets than you would for a standard 330, but I think you definitely do get that back in smiles per gallon. It's just such a pleasure to drive this car. And what's interesting is that you don't have to be speeding everywhere to have fun from it. Most of the time you find yourself grinning, look down at the speedo and you're doing the speed limit. Truthfully, I love this car, but I think the reason I haven't fallen out with it is because I don't use it every day. If I were to use this car every day, it would annoy me. I know it would. The ride's too firm. I can't pair my phone to the antiquated system. I can't stream my music through it, which is probably a blessing. Yeah, it's just not that easy to live with on a daily basis. Or, yeah, you could use it on a daily basis, but it would just annoy me. Sometimes if I choose to drive this and I'm not in the right frame of mind, I find myself getting annoyed by it, and then I've got to park it up immediately before I fall out of love with it. So I just can't see me putting too many miles on it. So I'd rather just use this car on agreeable roads in agreeable weather conditions. That way I always enjoy every minute of it, and I don't feel the need to sell it. I just wouldn't want to use it every single day. How's that for honesty? Used prices start at around £6,000 here in the UK, but be wary because, well, I bought a fairly decent one and I've still put £7,000 and a bit, almost £8,000 back into it, making it mint. One word of warning, do not, under any circumstances, as tempting as it might seem, buy a cheap one, because there's no such thing. If you find a cheap scruffy one, it will just need a load of money thrown at it. So you may as well just use that money and buy decent ones to begin with. You really want to buy the best one you can find that's been lavished and pampered and looked after, rather than buying the cheapest one out there. So here's some buying advice for you, but I'm about to stereotype and judge a little bit, so if that offends you, probably best to switch off. In my opinion, you're better off looking for one that hasn't been modified, because I think if it looks as though it's been lowered and the wheels are odd, or the tyres are odd, or the wheels are painted, or it's got a carbon black wrapped bonnet, or it's got those carbon effect BMW badges, I just think it's probably been neglected and had a hard life, and it's probably spent the evenings delivering pharmaceuticals, shall we say, in less salubrious areas. So in my opinion, you're better off looking for one that looks completely stock, completely original. You want one really that some rich accountant's owned, that's just looked after it and used it every other Sunday to go to the golf club in, if that thing exists. They do exist, they just command a premium, but it's a premium worth paying. Also, look for things like, make sure it's got all of its keys. I always think it looks good if it's got its original BMW supplying dealer plates. I would avoid one that's got some hideous 3D printed carbon effect German style tin plate. Just don't think it looks very good. And also, when you're looking for a car from a private buyer, I know this sounds terrible and snobbish and maybe a little bit elitist, but look at the house too, because chances are, if the hedges are overgrown, the lawn's overgrown, the window frames are scruffy and unpainted, do you really think if they've neglected the property, they will have spent money looking after an M3? Chances are they won't have done. You also want to make sure it's got good service records, preferably from a BMW specialist or BMW main dealer, rather than a quick fit or a Halfords. Make sure it's had its vital running in service at around 1,200 miles as well. That's crucial. And also check things like, has it got its torch in the glove compartment? Has it got a full toolkit? Just things that show that it's been looked after and maintained. I just think originality is king. You could learn something from the mistakes I made, because I didn't buy the cheapest one I could find, and yet I've still sunk thousands upon thousands into this car. But I think one day I'll get it back, and to be honest, I'm not that bothered because I love it. I truly think in the next few years they will start to rocket in value. They're already starting to increase, and a good one, in good condition with good service records, will always fetch a premium. So to answer the original question, should you buy an E46 M3? Well, I think you know my answer. It's a definite yes. I love mine, I think they're great cars. What else could you have bought from the early 2000s that is as good as the E46 M3? I'll leave you to ponder that. In fact, let me know in the comments below. In fact, don't, because then I'm going to get turned on by something else, and I'm going to fall out with the M3, which I desperately don't want to do. So, thank you once again for watching. Make sure you give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't done already. You can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I'll leave the link below. If you've got any comments or questions, let me know, and I'll do my best to get back to you. So yeah, cheers guys. I'll see you next time.